Leading up to October of 2023, former corrections officer Jason Pass, aged 47, had been feuding with his upstairs neighbors at the Flatbush Gardens complex in Brooklyn, New York City for about 4 years regarding noise. On October the 29th, CCTV showed Pass angrily pacing in a hallway before he was approached by his neighbor, Marie DeLille, who was joined by her son, Chinwai Mode, aged 27. In the moments that followed, 47-year-old Bladimy Mathurin, DeLille's husband and Mode's stepfather, stormed out of their home wielding a pair of scissors. Mathurin, an amateur bodybuilder, confronted Pass with the scissors in hand. DeLille pulled him back, but the man shook her off and turned back towards Pass, who brandished a pistol with a laser sight. Mathurin seemingly acknowledged the weapon pointed at him, but waved it off and walked back towards his home. Within seconds, Pass opened fire and shot him multiple times. Mode tried to flee, but Pass gunned him down, leaving him motionless in a pool of his own blood. As Mathurin, a father of 4, was struggling to get up, Pass shot him execution style outside his door. He then calmly waited for the elevator, went downstairs and fled the scene. 9 bullet casings were recovered from the scene, and the shooting was described as the bloody culmination of a long-standing dispute between the neighbors. The previous day, Pass had banged on his ceiling because of alleged noises coming from DeLille and Mathurin's home. The latter responded by banging on his floor, which reportedly prompted Pass to make his way up the stairs and kick the family's door. Pass remained on the run until the morning of November the 1st, when he was stopped by law enforcement as he was driving through Brooklyn. NYPD Chief of Patrol John Chell later told the media that Pass jumped out of his vehicle with a knife in hand and took off running. He was cornered by officers who talked to him for about 15 minutes, yelling at him to drop the knife. Pass then charged him with the blade and was shot 4 times, including 3 times in the chest. He was rushed to NYU Langone Hospital in critical condition and ultimately succumbed to his injuries. Number 6. Ryan Whitaker. Officers from the Phoenix Police Department responded to a complaint of noise and possible domestic violence at a home in Ahwatukee on the evening May the 21st of 2020. As later shown in body cam footage, Ryan Whitaker, aged 40, answered his door with a 9mm pistol in hand. Upon realizing that the people who'd knocked were from the police, he instinctively put the weapon behind his back as the officers repeatedly yelled out, "Hands!" Whitaker then moved the gun towards the ground and started getting on his knees. In the moments that followed, Officer Jeff Cook, who was behind Whitaker, opened fire. He shot his service weapon 3 times and 2 rounds hit Whitaker in the back, killing him. The entire exchange had lasted roughly 5 seconds, and it was captured by the body cam of Cook's partner, Officer John Ferragamo. Whitaker's girlfriend, Brandy Nees, emerged from the apartment and, upon asking the officers why he'd been shot, was told, "He pulled a gun on us, ma'am." Distraught, Nees subsequently explained that they hadn't been fighting but playing Crash Bandicoot on a PlayStation, and that the noises were just them shouting comments during the game. Nees told Ferragamo that Whitaker hadn't heard them announce themselves as the police because of loud music playing in the apartment, and that he'd emerged with a gun because of previous instances of unexplained late-night knocking at their door. Leading up to the shooting, no obvious sounds were heard coming from the apartment on body cam audio. Prior to the incident, the upstairs neighbor had called the police twice. In the first call, they'd said, "I can tell that they're just at each other's throats down there." During the second call, placed half an hour later, the neighbor became irritated when asked if he knew whether the people downstairs had a gun and answered no. But if this gets pushed along any further, I could say yes to all these questions. The operator upgraded the status of the call to an emergency response. The shooting resulted in public outcry and triggered protests. On October the 5th of 2020, hundreds of demonstrators gathered outside the district attorney's office Whitaker's family demanded that Cook face murder charges, that Ferragamo and the 911 operator be terminated, and that the neighborhood called 911 be charged for exaggerating the noise complaint. Ultimately, Ferragamo remained employed by the department. Cook was neither fired nor charged, while Whitaker's family was given a $3 million settlement in 2021. Number 5. Haley Truncer. In the summer of 2019, Georgia woman Haley Truncer knocked on the door of her neighbors, couple Bryson Strickland and Kristen Smith, to complain that her 3-year-old nephew couldn't sleep because of their loud music. Truncer recorded the ensuing interaction on her cell phone. Almost immediately, Strickland, a Bartow County Sheriff's deputy, and his partner started swearing at Truncer as music thumped in the background. The couple repeatedly told the woman to F off, with Smith shouting that she didn't care what time it was. The latter lunged towards her neighbor, and when Truncer threatened to call the police, Smith replied, "We are the police." The couple also claimed that they had children in their home. In spite of being a member of law enforcement, Strickland made no attempts to de-escalate the situation and joined his partner in behaving threateningly towards Truncer. The woman posted the clip to her Facebook, writing, "These are the type of officers that Bartow County employs. This is what's supposed to protect and serve us." Strickland was fired from his position within the Sheriff's Department following an investigation led by the Criminal Investigations Division and the Internal Affairs Office. Additionally, he and Smith were arrested on charges of simple assault and disorderly conduct. Number 4. Thornton Family. On June the 10th of 2023, British couple Adreian and Rachel Thornton were having a barbecue at their house in the hamlet of St. Herbert near Quimper in Brittany, France. The Thorntons' land backed onto a plot owned by Dutch national Dirk Raats, aged 71, with whom they'd been fighting for several years. Rachel reportedly told friends that he'd threatened her and Adreian with a gun after they'd cut down a hedge, with Raats claiming that his home was left exposed to public view. Raats was also frequently complaining about the noise that the family was making. 65-year-old retired teacher Jean Lara spoke to the Daily Telegraph about the situation and stated the noise was constant and, to be honest, sometimes infernal. Her complaints were reportedly shared by other neighbors aside from Raats. The British family were said to be often playing music, cutting wood or clearing land, in addition to their dogs barking constantly. In spite of frequent conflicts with Raats, on June the 8th, Adreian moved the children's play area from one part of their garden to another, which was only a few feet from Raats' property. The decision would be interpreted by some neighbors as him deliberately provoking Raats. On June the 10th, as the family were having their barbecue, Raats, armed with a rifle and a revolver, opened fire on them. Rachel screamed at their 2 daughters to run, but it was too late. Their daughter, Solane, suffered a bullet wound to the heart and died at the scene. Rachel was shot in the back and neck. She narrowly survived and later had surgery to remove the bullets, with the one in the neck being close to a major artery. Adreian was shot in the head and had to be placed in a medically induced coma. He regained his senses and exhibited minimal movement later in the month, but was unaware his daughter had died, and the family feared telling him because of how it would impact his recovery. The couple's second daughter was in shock and had to be taken to a hospital in the shooting's immediate aftermath. Raats, who tested positive for cannabis and alcohol at the time of his arrest, was charged with murder and attempted murder. Number 3. Carlos Rivera. On the evening of October the 23rd of 2022, Chicago man Carlos Rivera called local police and reported a loud disturbance that was keeping him up at his home in an apartment building in the 4300 block of North Whipple Street. 50-year-old Rivera, an avid baseball fan, was an umpire at the Illinois High School Association, who also umpired for local teams. He was reported as generally beloved by his community. After reporting his upstairs neighbor, Rivera stepped out into the hallway to investigate the commotion, at which point he was shot in the face. He was subsequently rushed to Illinois Masonic Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. Updates from about a month after the incident indicated that investigators hadn't identified the shooter. The upstairs neighbors were initially reported as being uncooperative, but weren't named as suspects in Rivera's death. Cook County Crime Stoppers offered up to $15,000 for information that resulted in the indictment or conviction of whomever was responsible. Number 2. Kelly Danaher. Texas PE teacher Kelly Danaher was having a party at his home in the town of Huffman on May the 1st of 2010, celebrating the birthdays of his wife and daughter, Mindy and Perry. The party stretched throughout the day and loud music enraged Danaher's neighbor, former firefighter Raul Rodriguez. As later reported by his wife, Rodriguez had paced around their home for hours and even alerted law enforcement. When the party didn't stop, he went to confront 36-year-old Danaher. Rodriguez had likely expected an altercation as he'd taken with him his holstered gun, cell phone, flashlight, and video camera. Rodriguez began filming the celebrations and shouted from the driveway that the music was too loud. Danaher and a number of partygoers got into heated arguments with Rodriguez and even called 911 as they tried to get him to leave. Rodriguez, who was at the time in his early 40s, drew his pistol and told them, "Get back, I will shoot you." Danaher told his neighbor that he didn't need to pull a weapon, but Rodriguez spoke into his camera and said, "I'm in fear for my life is in danger." He then called 911 and told the dispatcher, "They're going to kill me," although the video showed the partygoers moving away from him. Danaher's friend, Ricky Johnson, made a series of movements including waving his arms and laughing at Rodriguez, seemingly disregarding the threat he posed. Still holding his gun and camera, the angry neighbor opened fire. He shot Danaher, Johnson, and a third man by the name of Marshall Stetson. Danaher bled to death at the end of his driveway. Johnson and Stetson were rushed to the hospital and survived with various injuries. Rodriguez was arrested and subsequently pleaded not guilty to Danaher's murder, claiming he'd acted in self-defense. Citing the state's Stand Your Ground law, he was found guilty in 2012 and given a 40-year sentence. His conviction was overturned 2 years into his sentence on the grounds of confusing jury instructions. Rodriguez was again found guilty during his 2015 trial, in which his former wife testified against him and was sentenced to life in prison. Number 1. Marcus Evans and Shaun Dagnan. Leading up to January of 2022, British man Marcus Evans, 49, had been living in Thailand for 5 years with his partner Wasana Mwanchit in the Markham district in Muang Kanchanaburi. In January, his friend 55-year-old Shaun Dagnan traveled to the Southeast Asian country to visit him. On the 22nd of the month, they were playing music from a Bluetooth speaker and drinking bottles of beer outside the single-story rented house. The noise enraged Evans's 23-year-old neighbor, Prasut Thipthep. He confronted the two men and attacked them with a metal sickle, commonly used for harvesting. Evans suffered a fatal wound to the back of his neck, with an inquiry later revealing he'd died from brain stem and spinal cord contusion. Dagnan from Nuneaton in Warwickshire suffered serious injuries but survived. Thipthep was arrested and charged with intentional manslaughter after he was found hiding in a nearby house while trembling and covered in blood. In the summer of 2023, a video of Florida woman Annika Olson went viral on TikTok, and it showed her screaming while being arrested by law enforcement in Bonita Springs. The incident had begun with officers probing flower vendor Norma Garcia, originally from Nicaragua, about selling her goods on the side of the road. She'd reportedly been warned in the past that doing so was against the law. Olson pulled up in the driving lane, stopped her vehicle, and approached Garcia. In the moments that followed, Olson was reportedly told by the officers to move her car and that she was causing a safety hazard for other drivers. Before Olson could comply, however, she was arrested and shown in bystander cell phone footage yelling out that she was only trying to give the flower vendor $20. She was charged with refusing to comply with the cops' lawful orders and resisting an officer without violence. In the aftermath of the footage going viral, Olson addressed the incident and was quoted as telling WBBH, "I didn't know it was illegal to give panhandlers money. I do it all the time." The woman maintained not knowing that Garcia was being arrested at the time and that she'd only tried to help out someone who was having a bad day. Many of the users reacting to the footage were sympathetic to the woman's plight and argued that the police had overreacted. Number 6. Kate Scottow. Englishwoman Kate Scottow was arrested at her home in Hitchin, Hertfordshire on December the 1st of 2018 following an online argument with a transgender activist. Stephanie Hayden had filed a complaint against 38-year-old Scottow, accusing her of harassment. Among the allegations was that Scottow had tweeted defamatory messages from 2 different profiles and referred to Hayden by using male pronouns. In the fall of 2018, Hayden had filed a similar complaint against sitcom writer Graham Linehan, who was accused of dead naming. He was given a verbal harassment warning by West Yorkshire police, who forbade him from communicating with Hayden online. Linehan later stated that he had no intention of contacting Hayden, adding that being banned from doing so was a bit like asking me to never contact Charlie Sheen. As a result of 47-year-old Hayden's Twitter fight with Scottow, the latter was arrested in the presence of her autistic 10-year-old daughter and her son, who was still being breastfed at the time. Scottow was detained for 7 hours and later found guilty of persistently using a public communications network to cause annoyance and anxiety. She appealed the decision, and public reactions to Scottow's case were mixed. Some argued that the authorities had had a heavy-handed reaction to the Twitter feud, while others argued Scottow had been justly punished for being transphobic. The law ultimately agreed with the former point of view when she was cleared, and her conviction was overturned a few years later, meaning that she'd basically been arrested for nothing. Number 5. Colleen Loud. In October of 2022, New Hampshire woman Colleen Loud was at her Northampton mobile home when the police knocked on her door. Officer Matt McHugh asked Loud if she'd heard a car crash that had taken place in the area, and the woman told him she had not, before closing the door. The 68-year-old had reportedly been sitting at home eating ice cream and preparing to watch a baseball game on TV. Sergeant Asa Johnson then knocked on the door and told Loud he could smell alcohol on her breath. Her BAC was tested and proved to be within the legal limit for driving. Nevertheless, Loud was given a choice of calling someone to take care of her or spending the night in the drunk tank. The latter option came to fruition, and the woman was led out of her home in handcuffs and taken to the Rockingham County Jail, where she remained overnight. According to reports obtained by the Boston Globe, McHugh and Johnson motivated the arrest by stating that they were trying to protect Loud from the mountains of trash in her home. Loud admitted that her home was a mess, but noted that aspect shouldn't have been of any concern to law enforcement. Loud later stated an intention of suing the force, saying, "I feel like I was violated. My rights was violated. I was in my own home. I wasn't staggering around." Johnson quit the force, and Northampton Police Chief Catherine Mohn stepped down in the incident's aftermath. Number 4. Petronella Wyatt. British author and journalist Petronella Wyatt returned to her North London home on April the 6th of 2015 to find the house in disarray. Her mother, a dementia sufferer in her 80s, had pulled out suitcases from which clothes were streaming out. The woman asked Wyatt, "Who are you? Why have you taken my things?" Wyatt had been living with her mother for some time and knew that her condition would often cause her to become paranoid and aggressive. In addition to failing to recognize her own daughter, when the woman threatened to call the police, Wyatt replied in frustration, "Do that." Her mother followed through on the threat and told the operator that Wyatt was trying to kill her. 3 officers responded and were led into the home by Wyatt's mother when they arrived. Wyatt would recount the events that followed in a Daily Mail article from February of 2023. She recalled the officers telling her that she was under arrest because they'd been told she was assaulting her mother. Wyatt burst into laughter, prepared to explain the situation, but her reaction reportedly angered the cops. She told them that her mother suffered from dementia and that she'd sometimes struggle with her grasp on reality, but her words were reportedly largely ignored by the police. Wyatt broke down into tears upon being told that she'd be taken to the police station. She laid on her bed in the fetal position, which led to the police accusing her of resisting arrest. She was dragged out of her house and into the back of the police van. Wyatt was ordered to shut up whenever she cried and told that she wouldn't be allowed to speak with her mother even upon mentioning that the woman needed her heart pills. At the station, Wyatt was led into a cell and mocked as she insisted that she hadn't done anything wrong. She was held in custody for what she described as 6 hours of hell and questioned before she was released without charge. When Wyatt returned home, her mother had completely forgotten their previous interaction and told her, "Where have you been? I thought you were dead." For years following the incident, Wyatt struggled with night terrors and panic attacks, particularly when it came to any form of interaction with law enforcement. In the Daily Mail article, she concluded, "I can't say I am bitter at life, but I am bitter at the police. The law doesn't like to admit it's wrong." Number 3. Royal Ascot Incident. In the summer of 2023, a woman was pictured in handcuffs as she was escorted by 2 police officers while at the Royal Ascot Horse Racing Festival in Berkshire, England. Thames Valley law enforcement was expecting activists from Animal Rising to protest the race. The group had staged protests against harming animals at 4 high-profile horse racing events earlier in the year, including at the Epsom Derby and the Grand National. Over 100 people were arrested during the Grand National after protesters delayed the start of the race. Regarding the June arrest, the police had spotted the unnamed woman who was wearing a yellow floral dress as she was carrying some glue. The police believed that she planned on locking herself to something and took her into custody. She was promptly released after the officers realized that she hadn't intended to cause an offense and was actually using the glue for her fake nails. Number 2. Brett Chamberlain. In July of 2020, Englishman Brett Chamberlain attempted to pay for fuel at an Exeter gas station using a 2016 Trafalgar Square Special Edition £100 coin. The 54-year-old carpenter was refused by staff even though such coins, only 45,000 of which were minted, were legal tender under the 1971 Coinage Act. The father of 4 from Devon was arrested on suspicion of making off without payment and interrogated by Exeter police for several hours. He was released while still under investigation and subsequently received a letter informing him that he wouldn't be charged. Coin collector Chamberlain had reportedly paid for fuel using the special edition coins at Morrison's, Asda and Sainsbury's without incident. He spoke to the media in the incident's wake and expressed astonishment at the fact that the authorities were prepared to prosecute him for using Royal Mint coins. The man decided to take legal action after failing to receive an adequate apology or an assurance the incident would be removed from the police national computer. Updates from the fall of 2021 indicated he'd received a £5,000 compensation. Number 1. Bjorn Sarmiento. Footage from Redmond in King County, Washington showed a skateboarder being controversially taken into custody on January the 17th of 2019. Upon getting off the bus in the Edge skate park area, Bjorn Sarmiento took a diagonal path across a small street, foregoing the use of the pedestrian crossing. In the moments that followed, he was approached by 2 bike-riding female officers of the Redmond Police Department. One of them pulled on Sarmiento's hoodie and the other threw his backpack to the ground as both proceeded to handcuff him. Sarmiento's friend, Alex Haar, recorded the interaction during which one of the officers was heard saying, "When we tell you to stop, you stop. That is called obstructing. Everybody, learn." At that moment, Sarmiento gave an over-the-shoulder look to the camera and cracked a smile with an expression of confusion on his face. Upon being asked why he was detained, the officers answered in unison, "Jaywalking." One of them had told Sarmiento to stop, but he'd reportedly failed to hear her because of his loud board. As others at the scene questioned the arrest, they pointed to the fact that countless pedestrians used the same path as Sarmiento on a daily basis. The latter's sister subsequently revealed that he spent 24 hours in jail in Des Moines and that he wasn't able to reach his family. She would accuse the police of singling him out truly for being a person of color. The video of Sarmiento's arrest went viral, and many users were critical of the police's reaction to the jaywalking offense, which normally should have only resulted in a fine. Number 8. Shadina Smith. On January the 16th of 2021, Shadina Smith had just left her New York City apartment in West 150th Street, near Frederick Douglass Boulevard, when she was accosted by a young man. He allegedly groped her, to which Smith reacted by returning home and telling her fiancé, 26-year-old Josh Hall. The couple rushed outside and confronted the aggressor, later identified as Musa Cisse, aged 19, in the lobby of the apartment building. Hall reportedly punched him in the face, and Cisse retaliated by brandishing a weapon and opening fire on the couple. 29-year-old Smith was struck 3 times in the chest, while Hall was shot in the shoulder and abdomen. The couple were rushed to Harlem Hospital, where Hall was stabilized while Smith passed away. The deadly broad daylight shooting prompted an international manhunt for Cisse, whom the authorities initially suspected had fled to West Africa. 10 months after the incident, he was found behind the wheel of a stolen car on Riverside Drive in Sugar Hill. Cisse initially gave officers a fake name, but NYPD detectives soon realized he was the suspect for whom they'd been searching in connection to Smith's killing. Following his arrest, Cisse faced murder, attempted murder, and several weapons charges. Number 7. Marie Laguerre. Surveillance footage of a confrontation on a street in Paris caused considerable outrage online in 2018 after a young woman was harassed and assaulted. Engineering student Marie Laguerre, aged 22, was passing by a cafe patio when her path intersected with that of a man who allegedly made lewd comments and wolf whistled her. Laguerre reportedly told him to shut up, and they both continued walking in separate directions. Moments later, the man grabbed an ashtray from one of the cafe's tables and threw it over the patio at Laguerre, narrowly missing her. He then walked back to the young woman and, without warning or provocation, forcefully struck her across the face. The attacker retreated and others from the patio intervened, including a man who'd armed himself with a chair to ensure he maintained his distance. The 25-year-old aggressor, only identified as Firas M under French court rules, was subsequently arrested and given 6 months in prison, along with a further 6-month suspended sentence. Firas wasn't charged with sexual harassment, as investigators found evidence of it to have been insufficient, but was ordered to undergo psychological treatment and attend a course on sexual violence awareness. He didn't have a fixed address at the time of the attack on Laguerre and had already served time in prison for violence against his mother and for pimping. As news of the assault began to circulate, Laguerre was praised for standing up to her harasser, and she subsequently started a website where other victims could share their stories. The incident also added to the momentum of a pre-existing push for French legislation that would see catcallers and aggressively lecherous individuals facing potential on-the-spot fines of over $750. Number 6. Aisha Walker. On November the 4th of 2017 in Winnipeg, Canada, a transgender woman was brutally attacked following a confrontation on a bus. 28-year-old Aisha Walker intervened after seeing that an intoxicated man was grinding up against a young female passenger, whom Walker had deduced was a stranger to her. A verbal confrontation ensued, to which a third man, whom up to that point had been completely uninvolved in the exchange, reacted by telling Walker and the man she'd accused of harassment to shut up and sit down. The former maintained that she'd only been trying to protect a fellow passenger, but the third man suddenly punched her in the face. The attacker then got off the bus at the University of Winnipeg and fled the scene. Walker reported the assault to the bus driver, who subsequently cleared the vehicle and told her to file a police report. The forceful blow she'd sustained had left her with a black eye, as well as damage to 7 of her teeth, which were chipped or broken. The police informed Walker that Manitoba Health would cover her emergency dental surgery. On December the 12th of 2017, the authorities announced that they'd arrested the man suspected of having attacked her and charged him with assault causing bodily harm. Number 5. Amanda Nunes. At around 6:30 a.m. on August the 31st of 2020, Amanda Nunes was getting breakfast at a food stand in the city of Belford Roxo in the Brazilian state of Rio de Janeiro. 30-year-old Nunes overheard a couple making cruel comments about her weight and confronted them. A heated verbal argument ensued, during the course of which, according to local authorities, Nunes slapped the man in the face. The latter then suddenly brandished a pistol and shot Nunes in the head. She was rushed to the hospital and subsequently transferred to an ICU, where she succumbed to her gunshot injury a few hours later. In the incident's immediate aftermath, activists were filmed walking through the streets while wearing t-shirts with Nunez's face and demanding justice for her. As of the latest updates on the shooting, which Nunez's social media followers labeled a cowardly act, local police were still reviewing CCTV footage and talking to witnesses in an effort to identify her killer. Number 4. Andrew Turner. On August the 28th of 2021, Kelsey O'Hara and her friends were out drinking in Bridlington, England. A confrontation ensued between 19-year-old O'Hara and Andrew Turner, aged 58. The former asked that the man apologize for a previous incident in which he'd allegedly bumped into one of her friends. Turner refused, to which O'Hara reacted by throwing her purse onto the ground and attacking him. O'Hara, whom multiple local media outlets would later describe as a baby-faced teenager, punched Turner in the head. She delivered the strike with such force that the man was knocked unconscious. He collapsed and hit the pavement with the back of his head, sustaining a cut of 5 to 7 inches. Turner tried getting to his feet upon regaining consciousness, but was initially unable to do so. Police and paramedics arrived at the scene, but he refused to be taken to a hospital, as his injuries were not believed to have been that severe. Within days, on September the 3rd, Turner passed away and the authorities launched a murder investigation. They didn't disclose the cause of the man's death, but citing evidence from a pathologist and a neuropathologist determined that O'Hara's punch hadn't been a factor in his passing. The teenager, who admitted wounding, was spared jail time in early April of 2022 and instead sentenced to a 6-month curfew. Number 3. Juliet Powell-Brown. 47-year-old Juliet Powell-Brown was parked in a sedan along with her husband and another woman at a discount tire store in Aurora, Colorado. On August the 7th of 2018, at around 5:30 p.m., Henry Wardwell backed his GMC pickup truck, which had a camping trailer in tow, into the sedan. 48-year-old Wardwell told the trio that he would be getting his insurance and registration so that they could deal with the small fender bender. It would later emerge that the man didn't have insurance and was also driving without a valid license. Once he was back in his pickup truck, Wardwell drove off, prompting Powell-Brown and her family to follow him until he eventually stopped farther down the street. The woman and her husband jumped out of their vehicle to confront him, approaching the pickup truck on the driver's side. Wardwell then turned his steering wheel, accelerated, and tried to get away by making a U-turn. In doing so, he struck Powell-Brown, causing her to fall and become trapped under the wheels of the trailer. Wardwell then continued driving, dragging the woman behind his vehicle until she was freed in the area of South Chambers Road, where her mangled body was subsequently found. Powell-Brown, who local media outlets reported was a newlywed, was later pronounced dead. Wardwell was ultimately sentenced to 18 years in prison after being convicted on 5 counts, including leaving the scene of an accident involving death, a Class 3 felony, and vehicular manslaughter. Number 2. Orm. A lover's spat involving 3 people from Phetchabun, Thailand, devolved into an attack involving a sword in April of 2022. As reported by local media, 40-year-old Orm had been having relations with a couple only identified as Air and his wife Note, aged 35 and 38 respectively. The latter two stopped meeting up with Orm roughly a year prior after she'd asked if her Bangkok-based boyfriend could join them. In the meantime, Orm broke off her relationship with the man and began pestering the couple to resume their prior arrangement, which Air and Note repeatedly refused. After yet another rejection in early April, Orm went to their home armed with a sword. The couple filmed the ensuing confrontation as they took shelter behind their front door. After pulling the blade from its hilt, Orm rammed it through a crack between the front door and the door frame. The razor-sharp sword was only inches from Air's face, with the tip pointed towards Note, but fortunately no one was hurt. The woman eventually left the scene following repeated pleas from Air. The couple later spoke to the media and claimed to have had some really great times with Orm in the past. After they'd stopped seeing her, however, they noted that she kept pressuring them for intercourse and harassing them, which they attributed to her developing feelings for one or both of them. Note and Air didn't report it to the police because they wanted to keep their lifestyle private. They hoped that by sharing the footage of the sword attack, Orm's newfound notoriety would deter her from further harassment. Number 1. Jamie Rathburn. In 2019, a South Carolina woman was arrested after sneaking into an elementary school and confronting children who'd reportedly been bullying her son. The Greenville County Sheriff's Office was alerted to the incident by other parents who'd seen a video that Jamie Rathburn had uploaded to her Facebook. In the clip, the woman ranted about she'd made her way to her son's classroom and, unsure who'd actually been responsible for the alleged bullying, threatened a group of children that they better stop messing with her kid. Surveillance footage confirmed that on May the 17th, she'd entered the Greenbrier Elementary School without performing the mandatory signing at the office. There was no audio in the video, but statements from witnesses maintained that Rathburn then began berating the children, aged 8 to 9, as they were lined up in the hall and waiting for class to begin. Rathburn was arrested a few days later and charged with non-student interfering, disrupting or disturbing schools. The woman was banned from the learning institution's property. While she later apologized and claimed that her emotions had gotten the better of her, Rathburn criticized what she'd deemed a poor handling of the bullying incident by the school. Number 8. Nathan Drew Morgan. Boater John Dotson and his wife Deborah, both in their 70s, saw that a jet ski rider and his companion had gotten into trouble on Lake Keowee, South Carolina, in March of 2022. After losing control of the watercraft at high speed, 29-year-old Nathan Drew Morgan had ended up in the water along with his friend Hannah Ayers, aged 19. Neither of them was wearing a life vest, and as Ayers struggled to remain afloat in the frigid water, Dotson approached her in the pontoon boat. He and Deborah helped the teenager into the vessel and wrapped a blanket around her. They then went after Morgan, who'd begun swimming towards his unmanned jet ski while it was circling the water. As soon as Morgan was pulled into the pontoon boat, as Ayers would later confirm, he began behaving aggressively, demanding that the elderly couple go after his jet ski and even trying to take control of their vessel. Dotson urged him to calm down, claiming that they would continue to help him. Nevertheless, an altercation ensued in which the younger man started grappling with Dotson, who was reported as a veteran of the Vietnam War, and his wife. Ayers eventually intervened and pushed Morgan in the lake in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. The couple didn't want to leave him behind and helped him aboard once more, but he resumed his violent behavior. He started choking Dotson, eventually prompting him to brandish a handgun and pistol whip him. The war veteran fired a warning shot in the air, repeatedly telling Morgan that he didn't want to hurt him. Ayers would later tell the police that Morgan was acting like a demon possessed his body and wouldn't relent, charging the elderly man once more. Dotson ultimately shot him in the chest and he bled to death in the boat as Deborah fruitlessly tried to administer CPR. Ayers described Dotson's actions as self-defense in every possible way. The same conclusion reached by the sheriff's office following a brief investigation. Number 7. Andrew Pasek. In late August of 2017, Houston man Andrew Pasek went to check on his sister's cat, D'Artagnan, as floodwater from Hurricane Harvey ravaged the metropolitan area. Upon evacuating her home, Elisa Pasek had left the Maine Coon behind with an automatic feeder and a reserve of fresh water. He was just trying to be my hero, the woman later told a media outlet. 25-year-old Andrew had called Elisa to say that he was in her neighborhood and heading to check on D'Artagnan. The Army Corps of Engineers had done a controlled release of the Addicts Reservoir, and Elisa's house had 5 feet of water inside. The power in her neighborhood hadn't been turned off prior to the reservoir's release. In 2011, during his sophomore year at the University of Texas, San Antonio, a car had run over Andrew's ankle, resulting in plates and metal screws being inserted to set his bone. As he stepped in the knee-deep water, the man touched a live wire with his foot, and the current jumped to the metal in his leg. He immediately felt the shock, and according to later reports, told a friend walking behind him, "Don't touch me, I'm dying." He then fell into the water as his friend ran to higher ground and called 911. Because the power was still on, rescue workers couldn't reach him in time, and Andrew passed away. His body was retrieved about an hour and a half after the initial shock. Number 6. Donald Wright. In June of 2018, Arkansas kayaker Donald Wright died at Sadler's Falls along the Spring River while trying to rescue 2 other paddlers. 64-year-old Wright had taken a group of roughly 20 people down the river. They were part of the Life Recovery Center in Searcy, where Counselor Wright had reportedly been helping them recover from addiction through faith and positive reinforcement. During their day out, Doug Gray and James Heisel pitched up and fell from their shared kayak after being sucked into a whirlpool caused by a rock collapse on the river. Wright paddled out in a heroic attempt to save them. Heisel went through the whirlpool and came up the other end of the sinkhole while Gray was able to swim to shore. The former was airlifted to a hospital and both men escaped the incident with their lives. When Wright reached a turbulent spot on the water, he became overturned and couldn't get back up. He suffered fatal injuries after being hit in the head by his kayak. Wright, described as an amazing man and big old hippie by his son, was mourned by many of those on whom he'd had a positive influence on in their struggle with addiction. Number 5. Dennishia Smith. 21-year-old Dennishia Smith from East Point, Georgia, was gunned down in May of 2022 by a man whom, according to family members, she'd been trying to help out. By all accounts, Smith thought that Shelton Handspike was her friend, and they weren't reported as being romantically involved. She'd been helping him get back on his feet by allowing him to live rent-free at her apartment. However, while going through a period of financial difficulty, the young woman asked Handspike to move out. He became enraged when the subject was brought up and grabbed a handgun from another woman living in the apartment. Smith tried to fight back but was overpowered and fatally shot. Upon learning about her death, the victim's mother told a media outlet, "I feel like someone snatched my soul out of my body." She remarked upon the situation's iniquity by adding that her child had been slaughtered for trying to be a good Samaritan. In the aftermath, Handspike was arrested and charged with murder. Number 4. Brittany Booker. Wisconsin woman Brittany Booker intervened when her friend was attacked by her abusive partner, 41-year-old Terry Scooterman Jackson, at a home in Racine on February the 27th of 2022. The latter beat both Booker and his partner, whose identity wasn't released, with a claw hammer, inflicting serious injuries from which they ultimately recovered. He fled Racine in the attack's wake and a warrant was put out for his arrest on charges of attempted murder. Jackson returned less than 2 months later and broke into 30-year-old Booker's home on April the 24th. He assaulted and forcefully removed the mother of 6 from the residence. The Racine Police Department later found the woman's lifeless body in her vehicle and determined she'd sustained a fatal gunshot to the head. Her selfless attempt to help her friend had resulted in Booker being battered and ultimately brutally murdered. A manhunt for Jackson was launched by the U.S. Marshals Service that stretched through Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Texas, and Arizona. The investigation ultimately led the authorities back to Illinois in May after Jackson was located in Chicago following a tip. He was spotted through a window while he was holding a firearm, but eventually surrendered after a brief standoff and negotiations. As reported by law enforcement, he confessed to his crimes during subsequent interviews. His ensuing charges included first-degree intentional homicide, kidnapping and firearms possession, in addition to bail jumping and multiple counts of domestic abuse. Number 3. Jacob McClanahan. Kentucky father of 8, Justin Moore, ran out of gas while driving on Indiana's State Road 135 in May of 2022. He was left stranded on the side of the road near a school and reportedly asked residents in the area if they could help him with money and gas. 31-year-old Moore was eventually approached by Palmyra police officer Zachary Holly and volunteer firefighter Jacob McClanahan, who'd been traveling with a co-worker and had stepped out of his vehicle to lend assistance. Holly asked Moore if he had any weapons on him, to which the latter responded that he was carrying a small pocket knife. The police officer asked that he place it back in his vehicle, and Moore obliged. What followed was captured by Holly's body cam and dash cam. Within moments of reaching into his vehicle, Moore pulled out a shotgun and opened fire, nearly striking the officer. A second shot hit and resulted in the death of 24-year-old McClanahan. The officer returned fire, killing Moore, and subsequent reviews of the footage left zero doubt that he'd acted within his authority. In the tragedy's wake, Moore's mother extended her condolences to the volunteer firefighter's family for the senseless death he'd suffered while trying to help her son. She also revealed that Moore had been recently plagued by troublesome hallucinations in which he was a werewolf being followed and targeted by vampires. The woman offered no further information to indicate if his hallucinations had been a product of mental health, substance abuse, or a combination of both. Number 2. Adreian Payne. 31-year-old Adreian Payne a former basketball star at Michigan State University who also played in the NBA, went to a home in Orlando, Florida, with the intention of helping a woman engaged in a domestic dispute. On May the 9th of 2022, Tatiana Messer had called Payne's girlfriend to act as a mediator during a conflict she was having with her boyfriend, 29-year-old Lawrence Doherty. Payne and his girlfriend agreed to help and parked near the latter's residence. He arrived at the address a short while later with his father in the man's car. Doherty approached Payne, but the former's account of what followed would later be deemed to be contradictory of witness reports. Doherty claimed that he felt intimidated by Payne's 6'10" stature, more than a foot over his own, and believed he had a firearm. He went back into his residence, emerged with a 9mm handgun, and fired a single shot, which struck the former basketball star. Doherty's father got out of his vehicle and tried to help the fallen athlete, but about an hour after the shooting, he passed away in a local hospital. Doherty called 911 claiming that an intruder had threatened to kill him and tried to force his way into his house. The police interviewed witnesses, and it emerged that Payne's girlfriend had told Doherty, "Do not pull your gun out," while adding that they'd been asked to be on the premises. The authorities determined that Doherty wasn't protected by Florida's Stand Your Ground law, as Payne hadn't posed an immediate threat. He was consequently arrested on murder charges. Number 1. Brittany Merrick. On Boxing Day 2015, Brittany Merrick and her housemate, Brittany Norris, were on a girls' night out in Newcastle, north of Sydney, Australia. The pair were inside Finnegan's nightclub, where an incident unfolded involving 26-year-old Shaun Rudder. As shown by CCTV footage, Merrick repeatedly punched and then took him down by the throat after he'd allegedly called her a psycho. Rudder retaliated by spitting on her, and they were both ejected from the club. According to Merrick's version of events, she later spotted Rudder following Norris and tried to warn her friend by sending her a text that read, "Behind you." When she turned around, the man punched her in the side of the head, which resulted in her collapsing to the ground. As Merrick rushed to help her, Rudder reportedly responded with 3 rapid strikes that knocked the woman out and sent her plummeting face first into the pavement. In the attack's aftermath, she shared pictures of her bloodied and swollen face on social media, earning widespread support from online users. Rudder, who'd initially fled the scene on foot, was arrested and charged with 2 counts of assault, occasioning actual bodily harm. However, in what many deemed an infuriating decision, he was acquitted of all charges roughly 8 months later. He denied having had any contact with Norris, while claiming that he'd knocked Merrick out with a single strike in self-defense after she'd charged him with a flurry of punches. A court concluded that his argument held weight because of the extraordinary level of physical capacity Merrick had shown during the earlier confrontation at Finnegan's. Number 8. Henry Vincent. 37-year-old Englishman Henry Vincent had been linked to multiple burglaries already, when on April the 4th, 2018, he decided to strike again. He, along with an accomplice, broke into the home of an elderly pensioner in Hither Green, London, belonging to 78-year-old Richard Osborne Brooks and his 76-year-old wife, Maureen. Osborne Brooks told authorities that he heard a knock at the door late at night. When he answered the door, the 2 men grabbed him and shoved him into his home. They demanded money, and Vincent used a screwdriver as a weapon to intimidate Osborne Brooks. But Osborne Brooks didn't back down. In an attempt to protect himself and his wife, he grabbed a 12-inch kitchen knife and told Vincent to leave, warning him that they would be sorry if they didn't. When Vincent's accomplice saw the large knife, he fled the scene and encouraged Vincent to do so as well. Instead of following his accomplice's lead, Vincent lunged towards Osborne Brooks with the intention of stabbing him first with the screwdriver, but Osborne Brooks's knife made contact first. Vincent finally fled the home following the stabbing, but collapsed nearby. Police found him and transported him to a nearby hospital, where he succumbed to his wounds and was pronounced dead. Osborne Brooks was arrested on suspicion of murder, but was released without charge shortly after. Number 7. Christopher Hoops. The belief that someone is intruding your home, whether or not it's true, is sometimes enough for tragedy to strike. The case of 36-year-old Christopher Hoops and his 25-year-old wife, Colleen Hoops, is a tragic example of this. In the middle of the night on May the 20th, 2022, Christopher Hoops woke up in their Tempe, Arizona home and was startled by a figure in his bedroom. He reached for his gun and fired 3 shots, 2 of which struck the figure. Upon realizing that it was his wife, Colleen, Christopher called 911 for help. Officers arrived at the home at 3:45 a.m. and Colleen was rushed to the hospital in an effort to tend to 2 gunshot wounds in her chest. Unfortunately, she was pronounced dead just a short time later at 4:10 a.m. Christopher was charged with second-degree murder and the unlawful discharge of a weapon. He was taken to jail and booked on a $750,000 bond, which he posted on May the 22nd, 2022. His trial is expected to take place in October of 2022. If found guilty, he will be sentenced to a maximum of 25 years in prison. Number 6. Virginia Morrison. Virginia Morrison, a 69-year-old grandmother from Florida, was enjoying her Sunday afternoon at home on May the 22nd, 2022. That is, until she realized that an unidentified man had entered her home and was standing in her living room. She described the man's face as a total blank, and despite her asking him who he was and why he was in her home, he said nothing. She called to her husband in the other room, 80-year-old Charlie Morrison, to get his gun in hopes of scaring off the intruder. When the sight of the gun didn't make the intruder budge, they called 911. Morrison quickly grabbed her own gun while on the phone, and Charlie fired a warning shot into the ground beside the intruder. That made the intruder leave the living room and go outside, but he remained on their property, maintaining a blank stare and never saying a word. Virginia followed him outside and fired her own warning shot above the intruder, warning him that she would shoot him if he didn't leave. That's when the intruder started coming towards her, and in an act of self-defense, she shot him. Police arrived at the scene and took the man to the hospital, where he was ultimately pronounced dead. He was later identified as 38-year-old Ezequiel Rosario Torres. At this time, no charges have been filed against Morrison, but the case has been forwarded to the state attorney's office to decide whether or not she should face charges.
He stepped in, and I just turned around and I said, "Who are you? What do you want?" Nothing. This guy never said a word the whole time he was here. I fired a warning shot, told him to back off. He just kept coming. And I didn't realize I'd hit him, but once I looked, he had a hole right here in his t-shirt, and I thought, I got him.
Number 5. Anthony Gray. On April the 18th of 2022, 52-year-old Anthony Gray trespassed onto Stagg High School in Stockton, California. He drove his car into one of the school's parking lots, parked, and walked right onto campus. A high schooler named Alicia Renyaga was in the parking lot at the time, and when Gray saw her, he targeted her out of the blue, stabbing her several times. Witnesses and school security called 911, and when police arrived shortly after, Gray was immediately arrested. The high schooler was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, she was unable to recover from her wounds and died the same day. Police determined the stabbing to be a random act of violence and have been unable to identify a motive for Gray's actions. At a hearing on May the 16th, 2022, Gray suddenly called out to the judge saying that he wanted to plead guilty to the crime. His lawyer disagreed with his plea and expressed to the judge that Gray had a history of mental illness and should be interviewed by a doctor to determine if he is fit to stand trial. The judge granted this request, but on June the 13th, the court-appointed doctor concluded that Gray was in fact competent to stand trial. Gray was charged with murder, injuring a child, and possessing a weapon on school grounds, and is awaiting trial behind bars without bail. A date for the trial has yet to be set. Number 4. Travis and Jamie Lynn Jewton. At 3 a.m. on August the 13th, 2021, married couple Travis and Jamie Lynn Jewton were asleep in their home in Marion County, Oregon. They were set to travel to Hawaii the next day and had a friend who would be looking after their home and cat sleeping in their guest bedroom. An intruder, unidentifiable due to the mask they were wearing, broke into the home and attacked the married couple with a knife while they slept in their bed. 24-year-old Jamie Lynn suffered 19 stab wounds, and in trying to protect his wife, 26-year-old Travis suffered several stab wounds of his own. The friend sleeping in the next room woke up and called the police when they heard what was going on. Shortly after the attack, the intruder disappeared. When police arrived on the scene, they found that Travis had passed away in his heroic attempt to save Jamie Lynn from the attacker. Jamie Lynn was still alive and was rushed to the hospital to have her injuries treated, from which she eventually made a full recovery. Nearly a year later, police have been unable to identify the suspect or a motive for the attack. In June of 2022, Travis's family announced a $50,000 reward to anyone with information that will help them solve the case. Number 3. Luay Sako. On November the 16th, 2020, 23-year-old Celeste Mano, a call center worker from Melbourne, Australia, was stabbed to death by 35-year-old Luay Sako, a former colleague. The killing took place at 4:10 in the morning after Sako had broken into her room through her window while she was asleep. It was revealed that Sako had been stalking his victim for months leading up to the murder. Shortly after the fatal attack, Sako turned himself into the police. In the immediate aftermath, police received a tip that Sako, on his way to the police station, had dumped a cell phone near the home. It turned out to be Mano's cell phone. The police had a sneaking suspicion housed important information related to the killing. The cell phone was retrieved and was indeed found to have compelling evidence to aid in the prosecution of Sako. Despite having turned himself in shortly after the killing, Sako pleaded not guilty in court under the advice of his lawyer, who was attempting to help him avoid a jail sentence by obtaining a forensic psychiatric assessment stating that he was mentally ill. At a hearing in March of 2022, an official psychiatric assessment declared Sako mentally unfit to currently stand trial and will likely remain unfit to do so for at least a year. An update on the case is not expected until the spring of 2023. Number 2. Justin William Wright. Just before 9 a.m. on the morning of June the 21st, 2022, a 26-year-old man by the name of Justin William Wright broke into his next-door neighbor's home in Clearwater, Florida. The neighbor, a woman whose identity has remained private for her protection, woke up to find Wright standing in her bedroom. He began to attack her, and as she fought to defend herself, she managed to call the police. Even the police being on the phone didn't faze Wright, and he continued to attack her. That's when she reached for her gun and shot Wright once, which was enough to put an end to the assault. Police arrived and found Wright dead at the scene. Upon examination of the woman, she had injuries that aligned with the assault she reported, and police determined that the weapon she fired was legally registered to her. The investigation is ongoing, but police haven't found any information suggesting that the shooting was anything other than self-defense, nor have they been able to determine Wright's motive for breaking in. Number 1. Joe Horn. On November the 14th, 2007, Joe Horn, a 61-year-old resident of a wealthy Pasadena, Texas neighborhood, witnessed 2 unidentified men burglarizing his neighbor's home in broad daylight. Horn called 911 to report the incident, and while on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, Horn revealed that he owned a shotgun and asked if the dispatcher would like him to stop the intruders. Despite the dispatcher telling him not to and to stay inside his own home, Horn became increasingly agitated with the situation, saying that he couldn't let them get away with it. Eventually, Horn couldn't contain himself anymore, and he ran outside with his gun to confront the 2 intruders, who were fleeing with a bag full of money and jewelry, telling them not to move. When the intruders tried to run off anyway, Horn fatally shot them in the back. The case went to trial, during which a grand jury decided that Horn's actions were justified, and he was found not guilty. Number 7. Charly Lewis. On June the 7th of 2020, 32-year-old Charly Lewis was found dead in an alley in Denver, Colorado. She had been shot to death, and her body was discovered at 5 a.m. by a cyclist. Days earlier, on June the 1st, a homicide had taken place in nearby Aurora. On that day, at around 12 p.m., a gunshot was reported, and a 41-year-old man was found in serious condition. His name was John Cyprian, and he later succumbed to his gunshot wound in the hospital. A man named Stephen Young was a suspect in the homicide case. According to an Aurora detective, at one point during the night of the homicide, Charly had been in a car with Stephen as they were reportedly dating at the time. She had been the sole witness to the homicide. Aurora police put out a call for Charly, believing her life to be in danger. Unfortunately, investigators suspect that Stephen got to her first. CCTV footage from June the 7th showed him and Charly walking together shortly before the gun shop was reported. Stephen was then seen leaving the alley without Charly. He was sentenced to life in prison, having been found guilty of John Cyprian's murder as well as the murder of Charly Lewis. Number 6. Patrick Frazee. Patrick Frazee, a former investment banker, was accused of killing his fiancée, Kelsey Berith, in 2018. Kelsey had last been seen shopping with their daughter in a Safeway store. Patrick reportedly killed Kelsey with a baseball bat whilst their infant daughter played in another room. After the killing, Patrick recruited the help of his then-girlfriend, Crystal Lee, to clean up the scene. Crystal had been called multiple times by Patrick as he previously wanted her to take part in the killing itself. Patrick then allegedly burned Kelsey's body on his property. Crystal's involvement made her a key witness in the case. Patrick was arrested on suspicion of the murder and taken to county jail. Whilst awaiting trial, he met another inmate housed nearby. The inmate had tattoos affiliated with a prison gang, and Patrick showed great interest in them. Patrick eventually asked the inmate if he could use his connections to eliminate witnesses in his case. In exchange, Patrick said he would financially look after the inmate after his release. On paper napkins, which he passed to the inmate, Patrick wrote the names of the witnesses in the case and where they could be found. He asked that Crystal, her ex-husband, and her parents be made to disappear. Patrick then asked the inmate that he flush the napkins down the toilet after the information had been passed on. The would-be conspirator, however, was not willing to get involved. Instead of fulfilling Patrick's requests, he kept the notes and presented them to investigators. The inmate was questioned in court on why he'd come forward with evidence against Patrick. He replied that he felt it was the right thing to do and that he was hoping to have his sentence lightened. Crystal Lee, amongst the others on Patrick's hit list, had narrowly escaped avoiding a grisly death. She was nevertheless sentenced to 3 years in prison for helping Patrick and tampering with evidence at the scene. Patrick was eventually convicted for murder, solicitation to commit murder, and tampering with a deceased human body. He was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 156 years. Number 5. Joshua Brown. Joshua Brown was a witness who had testified against Amber Geiger, a female Dallas police officer accused of the murder of Botham Jean in 2018. Just 2 days after Geiger was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the murder, Brown was found dead, only a few miles from where Jean had been killed. Brown, Jean, and Geiger all shared an apartment complex. According to Geiger, she'd mistakenly accessed what she thought to be her apartment. Inside, she found Jean sitting in a darkened room eating ice cream, unarmed. Geiger testified that she believed Jean had broken into her apartment and she was afraid for her life when she drew her gun and fatally shot him. The apartment Geiger had entered was in fact Jean's apartment, 1 floor below Geiger's own. Immediately after the shooting, and presumably after realizing her alleged mistake, Geiger called 911. During Geiger's trial, Joshua Brown provided crucial evidence in the case. He stated that he'd heard what sounded like surprise between Geiger and Jean prior to hearing the gunshots. According to Brown, no police commands had been uttered such as "put your hands up." After the shooting, Brown fled the apartment complex. He later returned to find Geiger pacing the hallway, crying on the phone that she'd made a mistake. Brown also testified that previously he'd accessed the wrong floor of the complex himself, by mistake, believing it to be his own. This became part of Geiger's defense. Brown was able to massively aid the investigation through his eyewitness account. So when he was found dead, shot in a parking lot, 2 days after Geiger's conviction, suspicions arose in the community. To date, however, there's no evidence that Brown's murder and Geiger's conviction are connected. Prior to the events, Brown had been caught up in a shooting at a club where he was shot in the foot and his friend had died. Brown reportedly knew the person who had shot him and was worried they might come back for him. His family stated that during the trial he was afraid of the publicity that it generated and that his cooperation with law enforcement might paint him as an informant and make him a target. An investigation revealed that at the time of his death, Brown may have been involved in a drug deal gone wrong. 3 men were later announced as suspects and indicted on capital murder charges. Number 4. Mario Nero. In the early 1990s, Mario Nero was walking his dog in Foggia, Italy, when he witnessed the aftermath of a murder. He saw a man dropping a gun and fleeing from a dead body which lay in a pool of blood. The dead body was that of Giovanni Panunzio, a businessman who had refused to pay protection money to the Italian mafia. Due to the fear of reprisals from the mafia, many who witnessed their activity do not report it to the authorities. Mario returned home and didn't say anything for 3 days. That was until Giovanni's son made an appearance on television, pleading for witnesses to come forward. Mario felt compelled to act. He went to the local police station and described what he had seen. He was able to identify the hitman through photographs provided to him by investigators. The hitman was named as Donato Delicari. Weeks later, police officers arrived at Mario's door to warn him and his family that they needed to leave and enter witness protection. They would be given a new house, a new identity, and financial support, but they wouldn't be able to contact their relatives or friends. Fearing for their lives, they agreed. They were moved to Tuscany, where they were housed in an apartment with no documents or identity. Being new to the local community and not having any identification documents caused great suspicion. Mario and his family were chastised. He was believed to be a pentito, which is the name given to former mafia gangsters who were placed into protection after cooperation with law enforcement. On one occasion, when his daughter was ill, Mario was stopped from entering the local hospital because of this rumor. Doctors would also not come to his house. After over a year, Mario and his family were finally provided a false name and given documents. They moved city 3 times, but the pentito rumor followed them. By 1997, the evidence provided by Mario had helped convict 46 mafia criminals. He was no longer deemed useful, so the government cut off his stipend and evicted him and his family. Mario enlisted the help of a magistrate and was eventually readmitted into the protection program with a doubled stipend. However, he remained angry at the government for uprooting his family's life and causing them years of difficulty and worry. Number 3. Maldonado Rodriguez. Maldonado Rodriguez was attacked in October of 2018 by 9 members of the MS-13 gang in Long Island, New York. He had intervened as the gang was threatening 2 teenagers. During the attack, he suffered multiple stab wounds and was hit in the head with a bat, but he survived. Because of his intervention, the gang members were arrested. Rodriguez was set to testify against them, but was brutally murdered before the trial. It was reported that the gang members in jail had ordered the killing, which was carried out by fellow MS-13 members who weren't incarcerated. The prosecution had allegedly obtained a protective order for Rodriguez's identity in December of 2018, but 1 year later, in December 2019, a judge's order had disclosed his identity, leaving him vulnerable. Number 2. Guy Coffey. Guy Coffey had been working as a police informant, tipping investigators off to crimes committed by a Baltimore street gang known as Train to Go. The gang was dangerous, mostly made up of drug dealers and guns for hire. At least 10 members of the gang were already in jail, awaiting trial. Guy Coffey's testimony was to be invaluable in putting them away. One of the gang members in jail was Taurus Tillman, also known as Tash. In a letter written to him by his defense attorney, Coffey's name was mentioned. This was because Coffey had directly named Tillman as having been responsible for a murder committed years earlier. With the gang aware of Coffey's identity, a $20,000 bounty was placed on his head. Tragically, he was hunted down within months and shot dead. Richard Bardos, Tillman's defense attorney, refused to comment on the letter mentioning Coffey's name. Number 1. Whitey Bulger. One of the most infamous gangsters in United States history, Whitey Bulger was the leader of Boston's feared Winter Hill Gang, responsible for nearly 20 killings between 1973 and 1985. He was finally brought to justice in 2013. In October of 2018, however, Bulger once again made the headlines after it emerged that he'd been killed inside a prison by fellow inmates. Bulger had just been transferred from a federal prison in Florida to the high-security U.S. penitentiary, Hazleton. Within hours, he was reported dead after he'd been severely beaten by more than one inmate. Witnesses close to the case say he was made unrecognizable. Over the years, Bulger had worked as an FBI informant, which may have led to him becoming a target. A mafia hitman, Fortios Freddy Geas, was a prime suspect in Bulger's killing. At the time of Bulger's death, Freddy was also incarcerated inside of USP Hazleton and reportedly hated informers as well as men who abused women. Whitey had done both. According to sources, Freddie has not disputed his involvement in the killing. Number 7. Anastasia Kotvitska. On March the 14th of 2022, officials at a refugee border crossing in Hungary detained the wife of a former Ukrainian politician on suspicion of smuggling millions of dollars in undeclared cash. Model Anastasia Kotvitska, whose husband Igor Kotvitsky formerly served as a member of the Ukrainian parliament, was found with several suitcases containing upwards of $28 million while attempting to leave the war-torn country and enter the neighboring Hungary. A Ukrainian media publication reported that Kotvitska had been traveling with 2 Hungarian citizens and her mother when the group was stopped at a customs checkpoint in Vlok. Upon the interception of the cash, which had reportedly been stuffed inside of 6 suitcases that were then packed into a minivan, the State Bureau of Investigation opened a criminal case against Kotvitska. The model was accused of knowingly trying to smuggle undeclared money out of the country. Igor Kotvitsky, who in the past had been one of the wealthiest politicians in Ukraine, publicly denied reports of his wife's detainment and maintained that all of his money was still held in Ukrainian banks. He further claimed that Kotvitska had been leaving the country in order to give birth to their child and not in the furtherance of some corrupt financial ploy on his part. The incident caused particular concern among Ukrainian officials as it occurred in the context of growing fears that the country's wealthiest citizens might attempt to smuggle their money abroad to evade capital flight curbs and taxes. Number 6. Shareen Kashif. A police constable at London's Central East Command Unit was arrested on April the 28th of 2020 after it was discovered that he'd taken part in an organized crime ring that stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from drug dealers in the area. The officer, named as Kashif Mahmood, was dismissed from the Metropolitan Police and later jailed for a period of 8 years in connection to the large-scale corruption plot. On the day of Mahmood's initial arrest, investigators raided his Essex residence in search of evidence of his various crimes. Further investigation would reveal that Mahmood's wife, fellow police constable Shareen Kashif, had concealed a shoebox filled with thousands of dollars of illegally obtained cash from the authorities during their descent on the home. The exact sum that Kashif had hidden on her husband's behalf wasn't revealed in subsequent reports, and the police never retrieved the stolen cash. Investigators only learned about the box after intercepting encrypted text messages shared by crime group members. In January of 2022, Kashif was given a suspended 2-year jail sentence and was also ordered to perform 150 hours of unpaid community service. As a consequence for her actions, Kashif was, like her husband, dismissed from the Metropolitan Police. Number 5. Sylvia G. Ash. In 2018, the former chief executive of the Municipal Credit Union, headquartered in New York City, pleaded guilty to stealing nearly $10 million from the financial institution, which consisted of roughly 500,000 members. As was later discovered by federal investigators, the suspect, Cam Wong, had been aided in the large-scale theft by a powerful and influential ally. Justice Sylvia G. Ash of the New York Supreme Court, who also reportedly served on the Municipal Credit Union Board of Directors, was alleged to have abused her judicial authority in order to cover up Wong's long-running financial crimes. According to a criminal complaint, the 62-year-old judge took repeated steps to obstruct the federal investigation linked to Wong's embezzlement scheme. As part of her attempts to derail the inquiry into her fellow credit union executive, Ash signed a false memo that justified millions of dollars in payments that Wong had siphoned from the institution. The complaint also accused the judge of deleting text messages and emails pertaining to the theft, as well as making false statements when questioned by investigators. The year after Wong had entered his guilty plea, Ash was formally charged with 1 count of conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice and 2 counts of obstruction of justice. In December of 2021, it was announced in a Justice Department press release that the sitting New York Supreme Court judge had been convicted of her various charges and was scheduled to be sentenced on April the 20th of 2022. Number 4. Operation Guard Shack. In the early morning hours of October the 6th of 2010, dozens of FBI tactical teams dispersed throughout the island of Puerto Rico as part of a massive anti-corruption operation. The federal law enforcement agents, many of whom were members of SWAT and hostage rescue teams, conducted a series of sneak attack arrests under the cover of darkness. As the massive operation unfolded, more than 89 members of the Puerto Rico Police Department and the Puerto Rico Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation were taken into custody, codenamed Operation Guard Shack. It was the largest corruption crackdown in the FBI's history up to that point and marked the culmination of a 2-year investigation into allegations of drug trafficking by Puerto Rican law enforcement officials. During a press conference held in the aftermath of the pre-dawn raids, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder revealed that the operation had led to more than 130 arrests in total, which included 2 U.S. Army soldiers and 30 Puerto Rican civilians who were also accused of corruption to varying degrees. Holder also detailed how the defendants charged in the sweeping federal indictments had allegedly provided security during more than 100 undercover drug transactions in exchange for cash payments. As the legal proceedings progressed, 131 defendants either pleaded guilty or were convicted of the charges levied against them. The final prosecution associated with Operation Guard Shack occurred in January of 2013 when 3 men, including 2 former police officers, were found guilty of aiding in the widespread corruption. Number 3. Yona Metzger. In 2013, Yona Metzger became the subject of a corruption investigation while serving as the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, a position of supreme religious authority traditionally held by an individual of European Jewish heritage. Lahav 433, an Israeli crime-fighting organization, dispatched their National Fraud Investigations Unit to conduct a raid of Metzger's residence and offices. The mobilization followed allegations that the rabbi had pocketed thousands of dollars in donations meant for various non-governmental groups. This marked the 2nd time Metzger had been subjected to an inquiry concerning financial fraud. Back in 2005, Israeli police formally investigated the rabbi as he'd been suspected of accepting unauthorized benefits from a Jerusalem hotel. Due to a lack of sufficient evidence, the Israeli Attorney General ultimately chose not to seek a criminal indictment against Metzger, and the investigation was consequently closed. In spite of his acquittal, many of Metzger's rabbinic associates sought to have him impeached as chief rabbi. Metzger ended up serving a self-imposed 3-year suspension before returning to office in early 2008. The renewed accusations of misconduct that emerged in 2013 reportedly stemmed from instances in which the rabbi had stolen non-profit donations for personal use. Metzger's indictment detailed how he'd also allegedly taken bribes meant to influence his opinions on the religious matters he was meant to oversee as chief rabbi. In 2017, he pleaded guilty to bribery, tax fraud, and interfering in the trial process and was consequently sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Number 2. Vili Mahe Tokolo. Vili Mahe Tokolo was arrested in 2019 after it emerged that he'd operated as an informant for the criminal underworld over a 15-month period while working as a police officer in Auckland, New Zealand. The investigation into Tokolo's corruption uncovered that the 30-year-old had regularly accessed the police's National Intelligence Application System to obtain confidential information that he would then leak to members of organized crime groups. The police database, referred to as the NIA, holds a considerable amount of personal information belonging to more than 2 million people, which accounts for an estimated 40% of New Zealand's population. Among the sensitive material that the corrupt officer had reportedly leaked to his criminal associates was information regarding a law enforcement operation that had been targeting a multi-million-dollar Mexican drug deal. In exchange for serving as a mole for some of New Zealand's most infamous criminal offenders, Tokolo was reportedly rewarded with generous cash sums that totaled approximately $70,000. Investigators discovered more than 20,000 suspicious inquiries that Tokolo had made in the police's database, including information about 34 individual police officers. In December of 2019, Tokolo's trial was held at the Auckland District Court. He ultimately pleaded guilty to a charge of accessing the NIA for a dishonest purpose and was consequently sentenced to 2 years and 2 months imprisonment. A year into his sentence, it was reported that Tokolo had been granted parole. Number 1. The death of Shaun Suter. On November the 15th of 2017, police detective Shaun Suter was fatally shot at point-blank range while conducting a homicide investigation in West Baltimore, Maryland. The city's police commissioner, Kevin Davis, detailed during a subsequent press conference that the victim, an 18-year veteran of the force, had been fired upon with his own service weapon, which he'd lost during a struggle with his assailant. Moments before he was killed, the officer had sent a radio transmission indicating that he was in distress and required assistance. Footage captured by a private surveillance camera showed Suter's partner calling for help shortly after he'd been shot. In the wake of the incident, the Baltimore Police Department divulged that Suter's death had occurred just 1 day before he was scheduled to testify as part of an internal police corruption probe. The revelation triggered widespread speculation that the officer's murder had been orchestrated by one of the defendants in an attempt to keep him off the witness stand. Commissioner Davis attempted to alleviate concerns regarding a potential conspiracy, stating investigators' belief that on the night of the murder, Suter had approached a suspicious individual who'd randomly attacked him. In the years since the shooting, which remained unsolved as of the latest updates, many continue to theorize that Suter's death was part of a larger corruption scandal within the Baltimore Police Department, despite official statements to the contrary. In 2021, HBO released a documentary titled The Slow Hustle, which delved deeper into the mysterious incident and the persistent conspiracy theories associated with it. Number 6. Paul Murdaugh. Shortly after 10 p.m. on June the 7th of 2021, Alex Murdaugh called 911 after discovering that his wife Maggie and son Paul had been shot at their family hunting lodge in Colleton County, South Carolina. Police officers were dispatched to the scene, where it was determined that both Maggie and Paul had already succumbed to multiple bullet wounds. The authorities officially confirmed the identities of the victims the following day and classified the incident as a double homicide. At the time of his death, 22-year-old Paul was facing criminal charges stemming from a 2019 accident that he'd allegedly caused by operating a boat while under the influence of alcohol. According to eyewitnesses, he'd been exhibiting erratic behavior, which those who knew him later attributed to his supposed drunk alter ego named Timmy. The temperature on the evening of the accident had reportedly reached lows of approximately 40 degrees Fahrenheit. In spite of the colder weather, Paul, who was purportedly overtaken by his volatile alter ego, stripped down to just his underwear. He also allegedly slapped his girlfriend before losing control of the boat and crashing it near Paris Island. One of the vessel's passengers, 19-year-old Mallory Beach, was thrown into the water upon impact. She would remain missing for about a week before a boater eventually discovered her dead body in a marshy area in Beaufort County. As a consequence for the fatal accident that had been precipitated by his intoxication, Paul was charged with boating under the influence, causing death. He was also the target of a civil lawsuit filed by Beach's family. As with the most recent updates on the matter, investigators were still pursuing various leads regarding who might have been responsible for Paul and Maggie's murder. Number 5. Stephen Griffiths. Susan Rushworth, an escort from Bradford, West Yorkshire, England, disappeared on June the 22nd of 2009. Two additional Bradford women, both of whom shared Rushworth's profession, went missing in April and May of the following year. On May the 24th, 3 days after the final disappearance, local police arrested 40-year-old Stephen Griffiths on suspicion of murdering the missing women. Although Rushworth's remains were never found, investigators discovered parts of the other two victims' bodies in the River Aire in Shipley, a civil parish located within the city of Bradford. Griffiths had previously been diagnosed as a schizoid psychopath after revealing to psychiatrists that he'd fantasized about becoming a serial killer. In 2009, he was admitted to a PhD program at the University of Bradford that centered on homicide studies. It was reported that the police had kept Griffiths under observation for 2 years before he ultimately carried out the 3 killings. While being interviewed by detectives, Griffiths detailed the morbid and gruesome nature of his crimes, claiming to have consumed the cooked flesh of his victims after their deaths. In a TV documentary titled Making a Monster, psychologist Dr. Eric Cullen made the claim that Griffiths' fragile ego had been irreparably damaged in the late 1990s. The mental fracture reportedly stemmed from his former girlfriend breaking up with him upon seeing his apartment, which was full of violent memorabilia and covered in plastic sheets. Dr. Cullen postulated that Griffiths had permanently isolated himself from other people when faced with his partner's rejection. Nicknamed the Crossbow Cannibal, Griffiths ultimately pleaded guilty to the murders and was consequently sentenced to life imprisonment. Number 4. David Albert Mitchell. On the morning of September the 12th of 2012, an elderly birdwatcher was accosted in the woods near Central Park's Strawberry Fields, one of the busiest areas encompassed by the New York City landmark. Days before the assault occurred, the victim had reportedly taken what was described as a compromising photograph of her eventual assailant. She later told investigators that the man, subsequently named as 42-year-old David Albert Mitchell, had unsuccessfully attempted to take away her camera and vehemently insisted that she delete the sensitive picture. Mitchell ambushed the 74-year-old woman the following week and forced himself upon her as a cruel form of retaliation. The victim would later reveal that during the assault he slammed her head into the ground and threatened to cut her throat. Upon his arrest, it emerged that Mitchell had faced criminal charges on multiple occasions throughout his adult life, including twice in which his alleged victims had been elderly women. Back in 2002, Mitchell had been a primary suspect in the murder investigation of a cleaning lady named Barbara Flake in Jenkins Jones, West Virginia. Local authorities determined that the woman had been killed by way of blunt force trauma to the head, and one of Mitchell's ex-girlfriends alleged that he'd bragged to her about committing the murder. Due to a lack of evidence, however, he was never formally charged in connection to the incident. Mitchell's half-brother Joe was interviewed by the New York Daily News in the wake of his 2012 arrest. Joe claimed that Mitchell wasn't directly responsible for his violent tendencies, insisting that his alter ego, Johnny, was the triggering factor of his unstable behavior. He also expressed his belief that Mitchell's internal rage would only worsen if he wasn't placed behind bars, and that failing to incarcerate his half-brother would inevitably lead to him perpetrating further acts of violence. In October of 2013, Mitchell pleaded guilty to his charges and was consequently sentenced to 30 years in prison. Number 3. Hakeem Odumosu. The police commissioner in Lagos, Nigeria, went to the Brooks estate in Magadu to meet with a strategic partner during a social gathering on January the 1st of 2022. Upon his arrival at about 6 p.m., Hakeem Odumosu was met by 4 private security guards at the estate's entrance. They reportedly attempted to aid the commissioner by providing him with directions, but their bid to assist him was mistaken for a refusal of entry, and Odumosu became outraged at the perceived insult. The commissioner then loudly declared that he was placing the private security personnel under arrest. Shortly thereafter, a woman passing by with her 3 children was arrested as well after she'd reportedly intervened in an attempt to make sense of the situation. Several estate executives and security agents subsequently converged at the estate gate, leading to a complete shutdown of the area that ultimately caused a 4-hour-long traffic jam on Magadu's CMD Road. In spite of pleas from the executives for the detained individuals to be released, Odumosu wouldn't soften his stance until approximately 11 p.m. when he allowed the security guards and the mother of 3, who it later emerged was also recently widowed, to go free. Odumosu's actions were widely condemned in the incident's aftermath, with many believing it was his damaged ego that had compelled him to lash out so belligerently. Number 2. Mohammed Hoka. On the evening of July the 10th of 2020, London resident Mohammed Hoka and an unidentified friend made their way into the Cross Harbour DLR metro station. They then encountered a group of 5 other individuals while walking up the steps to platform 2. CCTV footage taken from the station showed that Hoke had begun talking with the other group shortly before 6 p.m. The interaction abruptly escalated and resulted in 22-year-old Hoke pulling a kitchen knife out of his fur coat, prompting the others to flee. Hoke chased after them, eventually catching up with 2 of the young men who'd run back down the stairs. He repeatedly attacked them with the blade, inflicting several stab wounds before they ultimately managed to escape. Hoke then fled the scene, leaving one of his victims, identified as Mohammed Samir Udin, critically injured from the attack. Samir's friends dragged his unresponsive body a short distance out of the station, where concerned members of the public tended to him while awaiting the arrival of paramedics. Despite the best efforts of bystanders and emergency medical personnel, Samir passed away at the scene. The other victim of Hoke's onslaught was taken to the hospital, where he underwent surgery for injuries he'd sustained to his back. 2 days after the incident, Hoke surrendered to local authorities, whereupon he was charged with murder and grievous bodily harm with intent. Investigators gathered from their interviews with the suspect that he'd never spoken to the victims prior to the day of the attack, and that he'd targeted them in a completely random act of violence. The judge presiding over the case's legal proceedings called Hoke spoiled, egotistical, and evil, expressing particular disgust towards the young man's refusal to show any semblance of remorse for his actions. The judge also claimed that because his only concern was escaping justice and not accepting responsibility for the life he'd taken, it was clear that Hoke's arrogance and egotism were deeply embedded traits that had been instilled in him when he was a child. Following a trial at Southwark Crown Court, Hoke was sentenced to a minimum prison term of 27 years. Number 1. Miranda Barbour. On November the 11th of 2013, Miranda Barbour went to the Susquehanna Valley Mall parking lot in Hummel's Wharf, Pennsylvania, to meet up with an individual to whom she'd talked on Craigslist. The 19-year-old had allegedly agreed to have intimate relations with the person, a middle-aged man identified as Troy LaFerrara, in exchange for money. After meeting in the lot, the pair drove 6 miles to the city of Sunbury. At some point, Barbour and her husband, Elite, who'd been hiding under a blanket in the back seat, viciously attacked LaFerrara. The couple allegedly wrapped a cord around the man's neck before Barbour fatally stabbed him 20 times. The following day, LaFerrara's body was found in a residential backyard in Sunbury, and local police quickly identified Barbour and her husband as being responsible for the murder. Although Barbour had initially claimed to have acted in self-defense when she stabbed the victim, the couple confessed to premeditating the killing as the investigation progressed. As detailed in an arrest affidavit, Elite told detectives he and Barbour had chosen to murder LaFerrara at random, claiming that they'd been motivated by the sheer excitement of committing an act of violence. In a subsequent interview with a Sunbury newspaper, Barbour stated that she'd murdered at least 22 people across the United States between 2008 and 2013 while being controlled by her self-described satanic alter ego named Super Miranda. The shocking claims caused the story to be picked up by news outlets all around the world, although investigators reported that they'd found no evidence to substantiate Barbour's unprompted confession. In September of 2014, both she and her husband were sentenced to life in prison without parole in connection to LaFerrara's murder. Number 8. Kaylee Goodall. On May the 15th of 2021, a British soldier pulled into a McDonald's drive-thru in such an intoxicated state that she tried placing a food order to a police officer who'd arrived on location to arrest her. Lance Corporal Kaylee Goodall had been out drinking with friends in Richmond, North Yorkshire, before returning to the Catterick garrison. Surveillance cameras would capture her driving erratically as she was heading to a McDonald's that was about half a mile from the base. She drove to the drive-thru window after failing to notice that the restaurant was closed and cordoned off. A few moments later, a police car pulled alongside Goodall. The officer tried speaking to Goodall, but was understandably surprised when she began reading off items from the menu. She was removed from the car and blew into a breathalyzer, which revealed that she was over 3 times the legal limit. Goodall was fined and given 12 months of community service and banned from driving for 27 months. The ban effectively meant that she'd no longer be able to perform her duties, as she had a specialist driving and communication role in the army. Goodall would also face a military disciplinary hearing in the incident's aftermath. Number 7. Kelvis Rodriguez Tormes. In 2020, a dispute at a drive-thru over the delay of a $40 food order led to the murder of a Burger King employee. 31-year-old Ashley Mason became irate and started arguing with 27-year-old Desmond Armand Joshua Jr., who just started working at the restaurant. Mason was accompanied by her 13-year-old daughter, who reported that Joshua was talking mad trash about them behind the drive-thru window. Mason was given a $40 refund by the manager and asked to leave, which she did. She then phoned and complained to her husband, 37-year-old Kelvis Rodriguez Tormes, about the perceived disrespect. He arrived at the restaurant in his work truck, where he kept a handgun, and challenged Joshua to a fight cell phone footage, which hasn't been made available to the public, allegedly showed Rodriguez Tormes putting the employee in a headlock and attempting to choke him out during the altercation. After a shift manager broke up the fight, he'd reportedly told Mason, "Bring me the fire," referencing his gun. Under questioning, Rodriguez Tormes reported that he got back into his truck and closed the door. He then allegedly saw Joshua jumping over his wife's car and heading towards the truck. Rodriguez Tormes fired a single shot at the Burger King employee, which struck him in the chest. He was later pronounced dead at a local hospital. Rodriguez Tormes was arrested at his home and told deputies that he destroyed the weapon used in the shooting. He was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm, destruction of evidence and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, while his wife was charged with principal to first-degree murder and aggravated assault with a firearm. Number 6. Imane McCray. In January of 2021, a man was shot at a McDonald's drive-thru in Indianapolis following an argument about music. While waiting to order, 22-year-old Imane McCray and her friends were listening to a late Chicago rapper. Jesus Medrano, aged 23, reportedly didn't like it, and a verbal argument ensued after he'd pulled behind their Honda Fit. Surveillance footage showed that Medrano then got back into his car and seemingly bumped into the Honda. He got out and they argued some more. Medrano went to the rear driver's side door of his vehicle before knocking off the Honda's passenger side mirror. He then pulled back with his arms outstretched and palms facing upwards after being threatened with an object from the open window of the Honda's front passenger side. It was presumed to have been a gun, but it wasn't clearly distinguishable in the video. Medrano then dropped to the ground after being shot in the head, and the Honda fled the scene. He was taken to a local hospital in critical condition and passed away 3 weeks later. McCray later gave officers her version of events, claiming that Medrano, enraged by the music, was yelling that he was from Chicago. According to McCray, he was cursing at them, throwing gang signs, and appeared to put a gun in his waistband. No weapon was found in his car or at the scene when the police searched it the following day. McCray admitted to shooting Medrano after he'd allegedly punched one of her friends and struck the car's mirror. She was charged with voluntary manslaughter, and her trial is ongoing. Number 5. Eliana Aguilar. In 2019, a woman was arrested in Oregon following an incident at a Beaverton Taco Bell in which she'd given cognac to an employee. At around 1:20 a.m., 23-year-old Eliana Aguilar reached out her driver's side window and poured a bottle of Hennessy into the mouth of an apparently willing drive-thru employee. It was reported that the two didn't know each other. The unnamed worker would later state that most of the alcoholic beverage was spilled on him and he'd barely drunk any of it. Aguilar's antics would be short-lived, as the car directly behind hers was driven by a Washington County Sheriff's Sergeant. He followed her vehicle and then pulled her over on suspicion of intoxicated driving. While she was in custody, it was determined that her blood alcohol level was 0.12%, contrasting the state's legal limit of 0.08. Number 4. Rashid Ali Kareem. On August the 10th of 2018, Florida woman Jamie Marie Roque was gunned down while in line at a McDonald's drive-thru in Bay Meadows, Jacksonville. At around 8:30, as the mother of 3 placed her order from the driver's seat, a man approached her vehicle on foot and opened fire. 32-year-old Roque was shot through the head and neck. She died at the Memorial Hospital less than an hour later. The killer then made off in a white 4-door vehicle. He was subsequently identified as 35-year-old Rashid Ali Kareem, with whom Roque had previously been in a relationship with. The woman had reportedly stopped seeing him after he'd become physically abusive, but her family reported that he'd been stalking her. In 2016, Kareem was released from prison after a 4-year stint on a cocaine-related felony conviction in Duval County. It's unclear if his relationship with Roque predated his prison sentence. Kareem was arrested the day after the shooting, and in the months that followed, he was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder, armed aggravated stalking, and armed burglary, which ultimately earned him 3 consecutive life sentences. Number 3. Elizabeth Ildefonso. In 2018, Elizabeth Ildefonso stopped at what she believed was a drive-thru window shortly after 10 a.m. and asked for a sandwich with bacon, egg, and cheese. The 44-year-old from Jamesport, New York, was severely impaired at the time as instead of placing her order at a fast food restaurant, she was actually attempting to do so at the security booth for the Correctional Facility and Administrative Offices of the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office. Even after being told by a deputy that she was at the jail, Ildefonso insisted that she really wanted a sandwich. The deputy noticed a white powdery residue in her nostril, in addition to her glassy eyes and dilated pupils. Ildefonso's vehicle was checked, and it was revealed that she had been operating it with a license that was no longer valid. She performed poorly under field sobriety tests and, instead of getting the sandwich she so craved, ended up in handcuffs. The woman was charged with driving while ability impaired and driving without a license. Number 2. Incident in Somerville. In June of 2020, a man wrought havoc at a McDonald's drive-thru in Somerville, in the Australian state of Victoria. The unidentified 23-year-old abused staff at the first window of the drive-thru before crashing his car into a bollard, causing the vehicle to flip on its side. He managed to free himself from the wreck and pushed a male paramedic who was trying to check on him. His onslaught continued as he reportedly head-butted a firefighter before being restrained by the police so that emergency personnel could tend to his injuries. He was rushed to the hospital where, following his recovery, he'd have to face assault charges, as well as further charges if proven that alcohol or drugs had been a factor in the crash. Number 1. Justin Ray Boersma. In April of 2021, a confrontation between two men at a Starbucks drive-thru in Lake Worth Beach, Florida, ended with one of them suffering fatal gunshot injuries. 19-year-old Justin Ray Boersma, driving a Nissan Versa, allegedly cut in front of a Chevrolet Silverado truck while getting in the drive-thru line. The second vehicle was driven by Samuel Joseph Rossetti, age 31, who then got out and approached the Versa. Enraged, Rossetti started banging on the driver's side window and ripped off the door handle. Boersma was in the car with his girlfriend and their infant. During the alleged attack, the woman had reportedly screamed, "We have a baby in the car," as Rossetti headed back to his truck. Boersma pulled out a gun and fired 3 shots at him. Rossetti would later succumb to his gunshot injuries at St. Mary's Medical Center. The teenager fled the scene, hitting another car with his vehicle as he drove away. Witnesses gave deputies the license plate number of the Versa, which led them to an address less than 10 blocks away. A surveillance drone captured a man covering the vehicle with a tarp, but it's unclear if Boersma was the one doing so. 5 people then left the home in a Nissan Sentra, including Boersma, his girlfriend, and their child. Deputies halted the vehicle at a traffic stop and conducted a search. They found a gun in a plastic bag under the child's seat with a caliber that matched the casings from the crime scene. Passengers from Rossetti's car were brought to the traffic stop and they identified Boersma as the shooter. Once in custody, he gave officers his account of the incident. He claimed that he was afraid for the safety of his family and thought that Rossetti had gone back to his Silverado in order to retrieve a weapon. It was at that point that he decided to shoot him. Boersma was charged with first-degree murder and firing a weapon in public, but there's a chance he might not be convicted. According to Palm Beach County criminal defense attorney Patrick McCamey, the case was basically built for Florida's stand your ground law. McCamey claimed that the defense could argue that Boersma had no reason to open fire with the child in the car if he wasn't genuinely afraid. Number 7. Stephanie Rogina. At around 11:30 p.m. on August the 26th of 2016, a police officer pulled up behind a Ford Edge that was sitting idly at a stop sign in Flemington, New Jersey. The vehicle remained motionless for approximately 90 seconds, even though there had reportedly been no cars coming in either direction. At that point, the officer, Lieutenant Scott Crater, activated his emergency lights, but the driver of the Ford turned right and sped off down the road. As recorded by the patrol car's dashboard camera, Crater pursued the fleeing vehicle for about a minute, during which the Ford swerved in and out of the painted lanes before colliding with a guardrail. The officer then approached the vehicle, which had been left disabled following the crash, and began scolding the female driver about her decision to flee from the traffic stop he'd initiated. The woman showed signs of impairment and slurred her speech in the verbal exchange with the officer. As the interaction continued, she eventually revealed that she was a member of law enforcement herself. The 26-year-old, a rookie Scotch Plains officer named Stephanie Regina, was placed in handcuffs on suspicion of driving while intoxicated, in spite of her attempts to obtain release from Officer Crater's custody by using her police badge. Regina was ultimately booked on several charges, including reckless driving and eluding. Court documents indicated that the officer later pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of disorderly conduct and was given a non-custodial sentence that included an unpaid suspension from the Scotch Plains Police Department. Regina's case was not the first instance of a police officer facing criminal consequences for drunk driving, but it did mark a rather inauspicious start to her career as an enforcer of the law. Number 6. Jacob Malone. Youth pastor Jacob Malone resigned from his position at Calvary Fellowship in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, after church leaders learned that he'd assaulted a teenager who'd come to live with him and his family. According to later reports, the victim had become pregnant as a result of Malone's abuse. Upon his criminal conviction in 2017, the 37-year-old man was ordered to serve between 3 and 6 years in prison. While Malone was serving out his sentence at the State Correctional Institution, Laurel Highlands, in Somerset County, state police received a tip from another inmate that the former youth pastor was attempting to orchestrate a pair of murders. Malone allegedly offered Angelo Tomeo $5,000 to kill Calvary Fellowship pastor Harold Lee Wiggins, who'd served as a key witness in his trial. The second intended target was Common Pleas President Judge Jacqueline Cody, who'd presided over his case and denied him a lighter sentence. When investigators were made aware of Malone's murder-for-hire plot, he was charged with a slew of additional offenses, including solicitation to commit murder. Malone ultimately pleaded guilty to making threats, but as of the latest updates on the matter, a sentencing hearing hadn't yet been scheduled. Number 5. Ashley Hunter. Shortly before 5 p.m. on May the 11th of 2021, police officers in Miami, Florida, responded to a car accident that had occurred at the intersection of Southwest 224th Street and Old Cutler Road. Upon their arrival, they determined that the crash had been caused by the reckless driving of veteran Miami-Dade officer Ashley Hunter. During the first moments of their interaction with her, officers noted that the woman's eyes were bloodshot and watery. She then proceeded to behave uncooperatively with officers at the scene by refusing to consent to providing a blood sample or performing a field sobriety test. The resulting arrest report mentioned how Hunter slurred her speech while talking with her fellow officers before she eventually requested to be taken to a hospital for treatment. As she was being escorted to a police cruiser, Hunter reportedly had trouble standing upright and nearly fell to the ground while trying to climb inside the vehicle. She was subsequently transported to Jackson South Medical Center and, following her release, was taken into the custody of her colleagues on charges of DUI and DUI resulted in property damage. The officer was later released on a $2,000 bond, and the Miami Police Department announced that they were placing Hunter on paid administrative leave pending an internal investigation into the incident. Number 4. Robert Cox. In June of 2013, the pastor of the Place of Refuge Church in Manteca, California, embarked on a mission trip to Texas with his wife and a team of church interns. While passing through Las Vegas en route to their final destination, 35-year-old Robert Cox and his group reportedly stopped at the Four Kegs pub for dinner. Investigators later gathered from eyewitness testimony that the church members were accosted by a man in the parking lot of the establishment, who proceeded to launch expletive-laden threats at them. A physical altercation ensued, during which Cox allegedly grabbed the man named as Link Ellingson and slammed him onto the pavement. 55-year-old Ellingson was knocked unconscious in the scuffle after hitting his head on the concrete, at which point he was taken to Summerlin Hospital. Cox maintained that he'd acted in self-defense during the brawl, and he initially received a letter from the Office of California's District Attorney that maintained he would not be charged in connection to the incident. After spending 6 months in a coma, Ellingson's condition rapidly worsened and he ultimately passed away from brain hemorrhaging. In December of 2013, a medical examiner ruled his death a homicide, and the authorities thus reopened their investigation into the June altercation involving Pastor Cox. Upon reviewing the matter further, detectives determined that there were inconsistencies with Cox's statements to the police about what had happened that night, and it was later announced that he was being formally charged with Ellingson's murder. The pastor was taken into custody and spent 6 days in jail before the criminal complaint against him was eventually dismissed. Number 3. Kerry Reeve and Adam Jackson. A pair of law enforcement officers from England's Greater Manchester area were arrested following allegations that they'd routinely partaken in the use of illegal substances from 2015 to 2017. During a 2018 hearing at the Manchester Crown Court, it was revealed that the two defendants, named as police constables Kerry Reeve and Adam Jackson, had regularly met at hotel rooms and other similarly discreet locations to keep their criminal activity a secret. As was detailed by the authorities, Reeve and Jackson had abused the same Class A drugs that they'd been working to eradicate from the streets alongside their colleagues at the Greater Manchester Police's Tactical Aid Unit. An investigation into the alleged misconduct uncovered that the officers had obtained the substances from Jackson's longtime friend, Daniel Wade. The latter and the dealers from whom he'd sourced the illicit substances were also charged in connection to the constable's frequent drug use. Jackson was reportedly jailed for 18 months after pleading guilty to charges of encouraging or assisting the commission of an offense and possessing Class A drugs. Reeve faced 31 weeks in jail herself after entering guilty pleas to 2 counts of encouraging the commission of offenses while believing one or more would be committed. Both Jackson and Reeve resigned from their positions with the Greater Manchester Police following their convictions. In March of 2022, during the live television broadcast of the 94th Academy Awards ceremony, comedian Chris Rock made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head while presenting the award for Best Documentary. When the broadcast cameras shifted their focus to her seated in the audience, Pinkett Smith, whose hairlessness was reportedly connected to a medical condition called alopecia areata, seemed irked by Rock's remark. Shortly thereafter, the actress's husband, Will Smith, walked onto the stage, approached Rock and slapped him in the face. The prominent musician-turned-actor then returned to his seat, from where he shouted profanities at the comedian, warning him not to speak about his wife. Rock briefly acknowledged the assault before continuing the ceremony. In the immediate aftermath of the confrontation, many viewers speculated that it had either been a scripted sketch or a publicity stunt. Later on in the ceremony, Smith was presented with the award for Best Actor for his performance in the film King Richard. During his acceptance speech, he apologized to the Academy and to his colleagues for his violent outburst, but as others would later point out, Smith notably omitted Rock from his public apology. Although a portion of the incident had initially been censored in the United States, the uncut footage from Smith's slap was taken from international broadcasts and quickly went viral on social media. In the days that followed the incident, which made headlines around the world, a video from Smith's 1991 appearance on the Arsenio Hall show gained increased traction online as well. In the viral recording, the actor was shown making a joke about bassist John Williams' lack of hair. Public opinion had mostly been leaning towards supporting Rock, and the clip caused Smith's outrage towards the comedian's similarly themed quip to be widely regarded as hypocritical. On April the 1st of 2022, Smith formally resigned his membership from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences after it emerged that he faced possible suspension or expulsion. Thanks for watching.